So let's very quickly go through the key research paradigms. And this is one of the things from my own work. It somehow fits in with some of the things we're talking about. Problem solving to being some kind of emancipatory, reflective, and so on. So we can see a pure, what I call enlightenment, very much understanding, that we want to know something that we didn't know before. Applied is a little bit more steering, engineering. So there is something that you want by doing the research rather than only be enlightened. Okay. Then I talk about two other things. So the problem solving, that goes back to Lars, what you were saying, that many applied linguists, and particularly young PhD applied linguists, cannot solve real world problems. But we can contribute to. We can take a step towards something that could be done. So that would be problem solving is when you are a consultancy based firm. Okay, this thing is not working, so where is the consultant that I want to ask to solve my finances, my electricity, my boiler? So you need a consultant for that. That's problem solving. But applied science is not just problem solving. It can be just problematizing rather than solving. That you have a better understanding of the problem, therefore you can now reframe the problem, which can then be a way towards solving the bigger problem. Consultative would be what you call researching with the participants. It's more reflexive, it's working together, more collaborative. So it is not just getting at the problem and solve them, but actually try to enrich our experience and our ideas and insights through that process of action research, participation, consultative, not consultancy. Pure and applied, or pure, the other word people use is basic research and applied research. It's not an either or, it's a continuum. So some of the things here is that as definite categories, this is pure research and this is applied research, it's meaningless. Actually, one of the key points that is made, and this is something very, very old from the American National Sciences Association, 1960s. So basically, if your research is applied, it can only be applied if there are potential users of your research. In other words, the target audience decides whether it is pure or applied. So you can't. So even if you say that my research can change the world, but there is no takers, nobody wants to buy your research, your ideas and findings, it remains basic. So in other words, to think about applied, it becomes applied at the end, not at the beginning, because you don't know to what extent your research can have potential users. Any research carried out in many universities and academic environments actually are mostly basic and pure if they are going to sit in the bookshelves in the library, because there are no potential users. And my colleague Celia Roberts came up with this concept of applied linguistics applied. There's a lot of applied linguistics which will never be applied. So applied linguistics applied is our meta-language, the way we write, the way we ask questions, the way we analyze. It becomes so opaque and complex, nobody can find it useful. So now you need already some other mediator to help you to make your research useful to the company, to the hospital, to the educational institution. So here we have some kind of applied linguistics. One of the things in those, it's not quite linguistics applied, but one of the roles applied linguists took was to mediate between what is basic research and how it can be translated, developed, or applied. But now you see lots of applied research are becoming almost like basic research, needs another somebody to mediate. So you need applied research, applied linguists. I'll give this example from a very classic anthropologist, Radcliffe Brown, and he was giving his presidential address 1929, 90 years ago. And see what he says. He says that if the research doesn't have any practical value, it cannot be called applied. And he was talking about anthropology as his root discipline, and he wanted anthropology to be applied. So what he did, he could see, particularly in the colonial world of Africa, where most of his work was, actually doing anthropology can uplift the conditions of the backward people. It can help the bureaucrats, the administrators, to engage with culture and kinship and whatever the concepts that anthropologists deal with, rituals and so on. So basically, he was saying that our work, the anthropological work, of course we can dig the past, like excavation. Anthropology can easily become archaeology. So you go past as fast as you can, but it's not relevant anymore to anybody. But anthropology can be relevant for modern times, for present times, if we took practical relevance as our yardstick, as our milestone. So what sort of anthropological investigations are of practical value in connection with problems of administration? And actually they have, particularly in not only in Africa, but also with the Aborigines in Australia and New Zealand. So what that really means is anything that is applied, there must be a functional perspective, a functional view of things. So if you want to have a viewpoint, let that viewpoint be functional. So the primacy of the functional as opposed to the historical, and that was very important in anthropology. Anthropology can be very historical, very past-oriented, digging the past. For Radcliffe Brown, it was more like the functions of culture, not the history of culture. And we can also say the functional study of language. So what is language and communication doing in multilingualism, in multinational companies, in e-health literacy, in patient care, and so on and so forth. So the more we take a functional view of things, the more practically oriented our work might be. And this comes back, I think this might be some issues, but I don't think it is worth even discussing much. Lots of discussion, is applied linguistics a discipline? And Halliday came out after a long, long time, because he is the kind of applied linguist, as a challenge to Chomsky, who was definitely not applied. So we got some kind of a juxtaposition. Himes was in a different, so it's basically Chomsky versus Halliday, if you think about the views of language and language research. So he was basically saying it is not a discipline, it's a theme, it's an activity. It's a way of doing something. So applied linguistics is much more a theme in the sense that it's a way of going about a whole number of different spheres of activity in which language, that is meaning making, is crucial, is a central part. So it's a thematic area rather than a disciplinary. And that becomes very problematic when we try to say who is or who isn't an applied linguist. It's very difficult because where is the discipline? And linguistics, as we know, is only one of the many disciplines that contribute to the questions we ask, from language acquisition to multilingualism to whatever it is that we want to know. It can't be answered by linguistics, but linguistics can play a part. I will not read through this. Basically, he's saying two things. One is it's a theme-oriented activity, so he's moving away from the notion of disciplines. Okay? So when you do anything with law, medicine, education, we can do different things. Applied linguistics can cope with any of these varieties of activities. So basically, if we think that wherever we look, some meaning is being made, meaning is communicated, then you can either ignore, you are not interested, but if you open your eyes and show an interest, then you are an applied linguist. So anywhere there is meaning making through language, multimodality, and so on. You may not do anything about it. That's fine. But if we do, then it's applied linguistics. So that actually can reframe the question. I think Lars mentioned, what is applied linguistics? It is what applied linguists do, which doesn't take us anywhere. The question should be, maybe there are other people who do something that sounds like applied linguistics. They're non-applied linguists. Then what we're talking about is either we can ignore a site, but we can show an interest because it involves language, communication, meaning making, then we are in business. So in other words, we'll never be extinct. So if you haven't called yourself applied linguist yet, do label it, because this discipline, the thematic interest, will never go away, because there will be always meaning made in every aspect of life. So one is the theme-oriented activity. The second one, what he calls, it's a problem-solving activity, not just a theme. And I think what I find interesting is he combines or conflates a theoretical approach to problem solving. So problem solving, not the consultancy type, that you just fix things and the problem appears again after 3 months. So you can get a plumber, now the hot water is fine, after 3 days everything explodes, because there was no theoretical thinking behind that solution. So what he's trying to say is he would like to take a theoretical approach to problem solving. And actually, theory and problem solving are not two different things. And that goes back to what I was saying. Every theory must be practical. It must have a practical basis. So we can be very different in our framing of problems, be very abstract or very concrete, but it has to be theoretically oriented. And that's the classic, the real world problem solving without being prescriptive. How do you do that? Because once you get an answer, you want to be prescriptive. You want to recommend. Change your practice, do this. How can you stop short of being prescriptive when you are trying to engage with real world problems? So when Bromfield was talking about, very similar to Halliday's point, is when we identify real world problems, particularly in areas who are not specialists, like in the bank, in the hospital and so on, they are not linguists, but they're dealing with language. They're language users. They're discourse practitioners. So when they're dealing with something, let's say an informed consent, a shared decision, or whatever that is they're trying to talk about, their agency in doing things, maybe it is realized and manifest through language. So therefore, in those non-specialist areas, we might offer our expertise as linguists or as discourse researchers, and that is a real-world engagement with the real-world problems. As I mentioned, this is the new buzzword called translational research rather than applied research. And you can see, even in the field of biomedicine, not all research that is done with, I don't know, millions and millions of kroners, pounds, dollars, very few of them actually translate to the clinic. So it's a big concern in biomedicine. A lot of research is blue sky research, particularly genomics research and so on. So what we are talking about here is how we translate research into practice. It becomes a very nice acronym, TRIP. So in other words, how can forensic linguistics, educational literacy studies, health communication and so on, the research that we are doing must have the potential to be translated for the immigration services, the classrooms, multilingual literacies and so on. Otherwise, we are not translating our research into anything useful and practical. So just like this is an issue in the natural sciences, environment studies, engineering, biomedicine, I think social sciences and humanities are also trying to hold on to this, that our research has to be translational.